All right, here we go.
Cool, we're live.
Let's do it. Okay. All right, we're going live, folks. Welcome to this StatBid E-commerce Workshop webinar series. So my name is Shiloh Jones. I'm the co-founder of StatBid. We're a performance marketing agency focusing on business-to-consumer and direct-to-consumer e-commerce companies. So today I've got my good friend Paul from EAG. I met Paul, I don't know, years ago when he was the head of growth at HVMN, and we did a lot of cool stuff together. And he's going to blow our minds today talking about influencer marketing. So super excited to have him on board. And then my partner Roy and I, a little background on us. My partner Roy and I started StatBid about 6 years ago. We kind of came together through the love of talking shop, and our goal with this webinar series is just going to continue in that vein, just talking shop and give people an opportunity to learn from their peers. So we're going to kick this off. Paul's going to do a quick presentation, and then just want you guys throwing out your comments, and we'll try to get through and answer as many questions as we can. And we're going to have some fun. So Paul, why don't you take it over, buddy?
Cool, awesome. Thanks, Shiloh. Really excited to be here. I'll start off with my background, which I think informs a little bit of the different approach we've taken to influencer marketing. So I actually studied computer science before getting into marketing at Stanford University. After that, I was on the founding team of a direct-to-consumer company called HVMN, where I built essentially the e-commerce workflows, engineering, and digital marketing. And one of the biggest success we've had was building and scaling our what we call Nano Influencer program. Over the past year and a half, we started a new company called EAG, which focuses purely on Nano Influencer communities and scaling Nano Influencer programs. So for this call, I'm going to walk you through a bunch of insights that we have into the space, how we like to work with influencers, and really try to give you a toolkit to help you and your teams decide if influencer marketing is right for you, maybe what kind of channels, what kind of activations are going to make the most sense. And once you've made that decision, how do you actually go about doing it, and how do you scale it, right? And what does it mean to scale the influencer marketing program? So with that said, let's jump right in. I think just trying to wrap your head around the space now is very different to maybe 5-6 years ago, right? 5 years ago, influencer marketing was a fresh, new, shiny channel, kind of similar to Facebook maybe 7 or 8 years ago, where CPMs were super cheap. The dynamic has really changed, right? And I think just to show you an example, when you look at influencers, you think about their engagement rate. That's how much consumers engage with an influencer given the number of followers. So if you look at engagement rate, that actually has dropped significantly on Instagram year over year. The other thing that's made this a lot more challenging to make work is that influencers are charging a lot more. So even though influencers may have lower engagement rate, they're charging 50% more year over year per followers. If you've got someone with 100,000 followers, 5 years ago, their rates would just be astronomically lower than what they would be charging today with the same follower, even though there's the same engagement rate, even though there's a lower engagement rate. And the other thing that's become a widespread problem is that influencers are posting so much content, and brands are doing it oftentimes in a distasteful way. There's so much junk out there. There's so much noise. And if you do things the wrong way, you can actually have a really negative impact on your brand, right? If you're spending on influencer marketing or you're investing in these posts, then you might have these tacky looking, product placement posts that actually might have a negative impact. The content won't perform on ads. People will be like, wow, like all these influencers are shilling this brand. And that's really not what we want, right? So the traditional model is broken. And why is that? Well, typically, if you're doing the basic stuff that people have been doing for the past 5-6 years, it's going to cost you a lot more. You're going to get less reach, and the impressions are less valuable because it's less believable, right? So one of the ways that you can get around that is with working with nano influencers, right? So we have a definition for nano influencers. Every agency has a different definition. If you Google it, could be something else. But for us, it's a small influencer, typically 5,000 to 20,000 followers. Could be on Instagram, could be on YouTube, could be on TikTok. The main thing is that they're not a professional influencer. They're kind of like our cool friends in high school that started posting on Instagram and just built a following. Super high level of authenticity, but they're not necessarily like pushing to post content all the time. They're not this kind of like professional person that just has every single, feed posts over the past 3 months. It's just a different product placement here and there, and that's lost their credibility. It's this cool guy on Instagram. And we found that by targeting these nano influencers, and also because there are so many of these nano influencers on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok, we're able to start scaling and getting really, really great results for brands with, nano influencer communities. Again, like, why do we typically prefer and think about nano influencers? Well, first of all, like I mentioned, it's super authentic and trustworthy compared to some of these larger influencers. And from an engagement perspective, what we found is that a lot of the engagement that used to happen on these larger influencers has actually gone down the funnel and is happening on these smaller influencers. Why? Well, because, their friends follow them, and their friends might not care so much about what shoes or what products people post, but they just care about the relationship. They'll listen to them. For example, if Shiloh tells me about this new soda or this new drink that he really likes, I'll care about it, not because he's a food influencer, but because he's my friend and we have this personal relationship. And so I'll mention that a couple of times because that's really important. And it's almost like, if you're able to capitalize on that, if you're able to work with influencers to influence people in their network and who they know and who have deep, close relationships with, that can be super, super powerful for your brand. That's word of mouth. When we think about scaling influencer programs and nano influencer programs, I think another big misconception is that people like to think about doing campaigns. Like, hey, I'm going to do an influencer campaign. I'm going to find these influencers and then work with them and then go do something else. It's really not like that. The brands that have done the best job with influencer marketing, MVMT is a great example, Halo Top's a great example, Gymshark's a great example, dozens and dozens of brands like that. They build communities. They don't really refer to their influencers as influencers. It's like their community. They have ambassadors. They use different words, but they build relationships over time. They work with influencers for a first month and then rework with them on a different product launch. And some of these brands have been working with influencers over 3, 4, 5 years. And so there's really a true relationship between the influencer and the brand. And that's super, super powerful. It takes time, but your community compounds because these influencers build deeper relationship. They want to bring in their other influencer friends and all that good stuff. So I think, again, if you're here and you're thinking about scaling your influencer program, well, start thinking about it as a community that you want to build up over time, as opposed to like, hey, I want to activate like X dollars worth of influencers or Y number of influencers this month. So let's go a little bit more into tactics now that we've covered a little bit of this background. So the first thing that's going to be really important is like, what are your goals even, right? Different brands have different goals. Are you on the performance marketing side of the house or are you on the brand marketing side of the house, right? Typically we see different things. Do you care about return on ad spend? Is this going to be a performance channel? Well, if so, maybe you're going to leverage more attributable influencer marketing platforms, maybe YouTube, maybe Instagram stories, because you can have swipe up links and track, clicks and revenue. Are you thinking about building a community that you want to leverage for other things? Maybe you want to use your influencer community and turn them into affiliates, into ambassadors, into sponsors, into whitelisting. Is that a goal for you? Or maybe are you going to be measuring this program more on ROAS or impressions? Maybe you're onto the brand side, right? And you've got some product launches coming up and all you care about is impressions and awareness. You don't actually need to track revenue. So you don't need trackable links. You don't need coupon codes. That opens up TikTok. That opens up Instagram feed posts and other things. Or do you really care about content, right? Are you running this influencer program because it's so expensive to create branded content now and you need content for Facebook and you've heard that UGC works really well? So again, this is something that you need to think through before you start thinking about building a community. Like, what actually do you want? Because like I highlighted in a couple of these examples, the type of goal that you have can really affect the influencer channel that you decide to activate. The next thing is, based on your product and based on these goals, you need to decide the type of influencer marketing you want to do. There's many, many different things. On one side, you've got celebrity integrations, right? So that might be a Fashion Nova working directly with a Cardi B, celebrity type person with essentially like tens of millions of followers on Instagram. She might get equity in the company. There might be a cash, component. There might be a custom product. It's not something you do with a ton of people, but it has scalability through that reach of that one person. I would say the next kind of like area there is going to be sponsored content, which is typically with larger or potentially medium or smaller influencers. With sponsored content, you're paying influencers to do a very specific deliverable. It could be a YouTube video, it could be an Instagram video, some stories with a swipe up link, many different forms. But the main thing is that there's a transactional relationship. You're paying the influencer to create this content. So the great thing about that is you can move pretty quickly. Why? Well, because there's cash compensation. And so you're able to drive the conversation forward. You can be very specific with what you have influencers talk about in posts. So that can be really great for product launches and brand awareness, where you want to distribute maybe a huge message at once. And it can also be really good for people with ROAS goals. Because again, if you're having a cash compensation and you're tracking ROAS and purchases on the back end, it's quite easy for you to optimize that channel. The difficult thing with sponsored content is that it can be hard to get a good rate because a lot of influencers are priced out and there's a ton of people, bidding for their time, for their content. And it's also pretty expensive, right? Every time you do a post, you got to shell out some cash and pay for it. There's a media spend cost. I think the next three things that I'll talk about are much more favorable from a cash flow perspective, because if you're doing gifting, affiliates, or whitelisting, you actually don't need to pay influencers up front. So what is gifting? What is seeding? That's actually our specialty at EAG. We found that worked really, really well. If you have a product that people like to try, it could be a food, it could be a book, it could be an experience, it could be a piece of hardware, a piece of clothing. All of these things that people like to experience and try, you essentially have an arbitrage. Why? Well, maybe your product costs $100 on your website, so it has $100 worth of perceived value, maybe more if you have a really hot exclusive brand. And your MSRP is maybe $10, $20, $30. So essentially for 30 of your dollars, you're giving an influencer $100 worth of value, and they're going to be super excited. And you can actually capitalize on that by gifting or seeding influencers to have them try your product for free, building organic relationships, and potentially having them create content for you, through a gifting relationship. We've seen brands like Magic Spoon, like Halo Top, like Butina bikini brand scale this massively to thousands, 2,000-3,000 influencers per month, and deliver massive impact by gifting influencers on a repetitive basis. Maybe in January, you've got a new flavor, gift that. Maybe February, you've got a different flavor, gift that. And again, you're building up your community through these, compounding relationships with influencers. Another example is affiliates. Arguably, maybe not influencer marketing, but I think it works with influencers anyway. The difference with affiliates is that typically there's less of a cash component, and influencers get a kickback. You give them a special link and you incentivize them to, share content about your product in order to drive sales. And then whitelisting, which is when you take over an influencer's account and run ads behind that account. We won't talk about 4 and 5 too much because I think it's a little bit out of scope, but I wanted to give you an example of the different types of activation models so you can start thinking about, hey, what are your goals? What kind of products do you have? So let's start picking an activation model. One of the interesting things when we talk about scaling influencer programs, like what does scale mean? To us, scale means from a gifting perspective, right? So I guess just taking a step back, just to be clear, celebrity integration is not something that's like super scalable through, unless you kind of like hire an agency or have relationships. We'll talk a lot more about sponsored content and gifting. This is applicable towards affiliate and whitelisting, but not so much. But we're really going to focus on number 2 and 3, which is our specialty, and I think what most people are interested about in this webinar. So when you're doing these influencer activations, we've consistently found a massive difference in performance when you're activating a huge volume of influencers versus a smaller one. So what is scale? Is it 100 activations per month? No, to us, it's 1,000 influencers per month, right? And so again, I think different brands are at different points in terms of like what they're trying to scale, but that's typically what we see as a breakthrough point where you start to not only generate tons of content, tons of impressions, and tons of revenue from your influencer marketing program, but it creates such a big halo effect that it starts to significantly decrease your paid social channel cost. And so how do you get there, right? So you're building your community. The first thing that you need to do is have a good playbook for growing your community, right? How do you typically do that? You need to have a test budget where you identify new influencers and you are able to determine if they are performing or not. And then you need to retain or fire them. If you want to retain them, put them on a gift list or on a retainer, depending if it's a paid or unpaid activation model, and put them on a contract so that every month you're giving them $200, $500, or a gift. That way, once people graduate to this retained cohort, you're able to continue testing people and kind of like build that cohort over time by adding more and more people to this retain them. And then if they're underperforming or you don't like the content, you fire them. So for example, your first month, if you activate 200 influencers, maybe you like 100 of them, next month you have 100 people in your stable, and you can continue finding more people to add it to your kind of like cohort. Another important factor is going to be to test different platforms and focus on one. Before you think about activating 1,000 influencers on any platform with any product, you absolutely need to test it, right? You should have done 50 to 100 activations, maybe on YouTube, maybe on Instagram, maybe on TikTok, and feel really, really good about that channel before you do that. The second thing is, if you're trying to scale to 1,000 influencers a month, do that on one specific channel at the beginning. That's going to be much easier. Why? Because every channel is different. You're going to have different workflows to source influencers, to vet influencers, to contact influencers, to track the content. If you're trying to do 1,000 activations per month, then you're going to need to dial in all of your workflows. And it's way easier to automate one thing than it is to automate 3, 4, 5 different things across different channels. So I think if you're starting influencer marketing, maybe for 1 quarter, plan on testing a number of different channels, a number of different activation models to see what performs well, what you're getting the strongest signal. And then once you've found that great vein, you can start focusing on that and dialing in all your workflows. This third point is you're going to need to staff this channel. You're going to need humans. One of the interesting things with influencer marketing is that there's no huge creative costs. It's not like TV advertising where you have to, maybe create a 20, 30, 40, 50, $100,000 piece of content. It's not like Facebook ads where you're constantly dumping money into, Facebook's, Facebook's models to be able to, spend money to target people. And it's not like SEO where you need to pay for content, kind of like SEO because you need people to write content. But with influencer marketing, you really need relationship managers, right? There are platforms that you can use. You can use Airtable, Google Sheets. You can use a Grin or other types of platforms that can help scale that. But at the end of the day, it needs to be staffed. Why? Because influencers need to be, handheld and have conversations with your brand. If you're trying to do this through a platform, you're not going to get that same human to brand connection. And influencers aren't going to be super excited to go above and beyond. When you think of an influencer and their audience, they have so much leverage. They might be charging one brand $50,000 for a feed post, and they may be charging their friend $0, So if you need to realize that there's a huge difference in potential rates for each influencer. And if you don't have that human connection, you're always going to be on the crappier end of that rate. And that's just not going to work for you. So you need humans, right? I could be yourself, or you can build a team, or you can hire an agency. But in order to hit that kind of volume, it's going to be people heavy. 4 and 5 are going to be some pretty actionable tips that we've seen work really well in terms of scaling. Every time, so number 4, every time you or your team write an email a third time, you should just have a hard rule to templatize it. You can use different apps to manage your canned responses, or you can use text snippets or Google Docs. It doesn't really matter. What you need to do is just to make sure that you have them and build up that bank, because if you have 1,000 activations, you're going to have the same conversations over and over and over again. And you can literally reduce your time of your communication time by a factor of 10 by just reusing these, canned responses. Now, you still need to personalize them because influencers need to feel heard. They need to feel like they're actually talking to a real human, but it's still going to cut down you can still answer objectives in a very relevant way by having these snippets. Some examples are like, hey, is this real? Is this a scam? What do you expect me to do? What are your goals? Is there compensation? Can I negotiate a higher rate? Can I negotiate something else? You'll have all of these questions come up over and over again. And so having like a database of canned responses is going to really help you, scale that. The final thing that's going to really help you streamline your process in terms of scaling is going to be, formula-driven negotiations. Don't even think about trying to, have like a decision for each influencer. If you're gifting, just make that a fact and decide that you're not going to pay influencers. Easy. One rate for everyone. It's just free product. Maybe you can have 2 tiers of product based on engagement. And then for paid activations, you really need to come up with a model or a formula to predict, what each influencer is worth for you and for your brand. And so again, that's where this test month or test couple of months comes in. Hopefully you've done already 100 activations on Instagram activations on Instagram and you know approximately what's worth it. We've seen models based on projected CPMs. We've seen models based on number of content posted. So I think when you think of your rate that you're going to define, right? Obviously, one factor is going to be the influencer's engagement, how many likes, comments, reach you expect them to get. The second factor might be the type of influencers. Some brands may pay a premium for beauty influencers and pay a little bit less for lifestyle influencers because there's a difference in relevancy. And then the third thing is going to be the number of pieces of content, right? If you're working with influencer on 4 pieces of content versus 2 pieces of content, you might have, that rate. And I think with these 3 factors, you can start getting a pretty good, rough formula to help you decide what your target rate is for influencers. So for example, if you're trying to generate 45-second stories on Instagram, maybe you pay influencers with 500 engagements $100, and you pay influencers with 1,000 engagement twice as much, and etc. But that way, it's really, really quick for you to A, negotiate down and offer a fixed rate, and B, just like not really negotiate that much. Because then with your influencers, you're like, hey, this is what we're trying to hit in terms of our pricing. If it's a good fit, great. If not, no worries. We might come back with you later, but we've got all these other influencers we need to go through. Obviously do that politely, but you need to be able to kind of like breeze through those negotiations. We see that all the time where, after 50, 60, 70 activations, brands are still negotiating in a bespoke way for everyone. And that will just completely, grind your growth to a halt in terms of, scaling the program. So that's some context there. The last thing I want to talk about is, once you're scaling this influencer community or the set of activations, like what else can you do with this content? So again, I want to give kind of like tactical things that you can leave this call with to help take the content and the value of your community even further. So the first 2 points are around distribution. Organically, right? Take your content, you can repost it on Instagram, you can repost it on stories, you can repost it on TikTok, right? All these things, you can put it on your blog, on your email list, on all of your organic channels. You can actually like leverage this content. It can perform really, really well. You can also put it on your website. We've found that very frequently, just like adding reviews, adding UGC content on your e-commerce product pages or homepage can help conversion rates. The second thing is with paid distribution. You need more content for your Facebook ads. Everyone needs more content for their Facebook ads. Try UGC, try some of this influencer content. Many times it works really well, both for retargeting and for prospecting. The third thing you can do is take your relationships with influencers one step further. And again, that's why it's really important to not work a platform, because if you have like these platforms that just, you pay for this specific piece of content or whatever, you don't have rights, you don't own the relationship, it's really harder to leverage these influencers to a more holistic level, which we really like to do. Once you've activated an influencer and they're posting for you every month, you can be like, hey, influencer, what if we took over your IG account and you give us access to it, and we'll show ads behind your IG account on our product? That's called whitelisting. That's not a great explanation. So basically what happens is the influencer gives you access to, through your business manager, the influencer gives you access to their content and their name, and you can run ads on behalf of that influencer, still with your pixel and your brand and your e-commerce website and all that good stuff. Sometimes that can perform really well. Some brands spend up to 70 to 80% of their media budget through whitelisting because it performs really well. Again, just something to test and try. The other thing you can do with your community of influencers is promote some of the better ones to affiliates, right? Or continue to, activate them from a different perspective. A lot of brands are thinking about community as a whole, trying to get their customers in a forum, in a Facebook group, bring those influencers in, right? Have them do challenges, have them share those challenges on their Facebook page, have them do giveaways, right? There's so many things you can do now that you have those relationships with influencers that know your brand, get your brand, like your brand, and also have an audience, can help turbocharge your community. And then we've also seen campaigns do really well. You've got a product launch coming up, you've got a new collection, you've got Mother's Day coming up. Well, do something special with maybe 10, 20, 30, 50, or 500 of your influencers in your community. Give them a special product, a special letter, something personal. They'll all share on their story, they'll share on Instagram, and you can really help amplify your reach massively and start generating more content for these campaigns. So again, the main takeaway here is think of it as a community. You need to build it over time, and your brand really needs to own your influencers relationships, because you'll want to be able to do, steps 1 to 6 in the future, right? It's just kind of like free value from something you've already built. So that's, I think, the overview. Shiloh, I know covered a decent amount and we're a little bit longer on time.
Yeah, it's awesome, Paul. We got some questions, so let's kind of kick into those. So first question, is that J curve due to cooperation or overlap among them? Like, why isn't it linear?
It's interesting. I'm not sure why exactly. I think it gets to the point where you see so many people talking about your product and your brand. So if you're one person, you're not only seeing one influencer posting, but you're seeing 2 to 3 of your influencers, and that effect seems to have a big impact on overall kind of like brand awareness and brand recall.
Cool. And then one question, you kind of covered this a little bit, is once you identify influencers you want to work with, how do you start the conversation? I don't know if you have any specifics to add beyond what you already said.
So I think just keep it super, super short and super casual. That's like a tip for everything. Like we have guidelines when we reach out to influencers, like talk to them like you talk to your friend. No marketing speak, no business speak, super, super casual. You'll get better response rates. If you're gifting them, then just tell them that you're excited about their content and want them to try the product. If you have a paid activation, similarly, just be clear with your intentions there and be like, hey, we have an option to work together. If you're interested, I can send you the product to try and we can get going on the rates. But I think typically we keep our emails to like 4 sentences tops, including like, hey, here's who we are. So it's super, super, super short. You don't want to give too much information at the beginning because that might be overwhelming. Just see if the influencer is interested. You can potentially jump on a call. You can chat through them or give more information once they bite. But we want to keep the outreach super straightforward.
Cool. We got another question. Whoops, sorry, I missed that question. 1 second here. Okay. How do you measure the performance of these influencer partnerships? Are you able to accurately tie users/customers back to the specific influencer?
Yeah, good question. So that depends a lot on the platform and a lot on the goals and a lot on whether iOS 14.5 exists or not. So yes, typically we can. So depending on what your goals are, typically we have unique links for influencers that we can generate, right? Whether it's a coupon code or a trackable URL, so you can track clicks, purchases, app installs, whatever. And then you also look at overall lift of the program, because not everyone's going to actually use that influencer link. So usually if you have a combination of the overall lift and then you see a little bit of a distribution across your nodes of influencers, you can tell which are the best influencers. And then separately, you can tell, is the program working overall? So we found that if you sum all of the engagement across the individual influencers, that's actually going to always account to less than your total program's performance, because a lot of it is non-attributed or comes across as an organic or like direct traffic. But if you have the overall lift through a post-purchase survey, through kind of like other attribution methods, and then you have some data on specific influencers, you can still hone in on the better influencers and set your targets that way.
Awesome. Cool. All right. Well, we're just kind of about running out of time. Is there anything that you wanted to say in closing, Paul?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. I guess we at EAG focus on building these communities on behalf of brands. So if anyone is interested in working with us, obviously we'd be super excited to chat. Even if you're not, we often talk to brands and help them build out the first couple of quarters of this program in-house, and give them playbooks to get started in much more detail. So if anyone wants to chat about influencer marketing, my email is paul@eag.la. Really feel free to reach out. Happy to chat and help give you some recommendations at the very least.
Awesome, man. Paul, thanks a lot, man. It was super cool. I learned a ton, and I really appreciate you taking the time to present that this morning. And yeah, we'll look forward to future StatBid e-commerce workshops. So check out statbid.com and sign up. And yeah, we'll see you all soon.
All right. Thank you. See you, everyone.